The greatest mistake most people make when they are attacked, criticized, or misunderstood is believing that the truth alone will protect them. The instant someone questions their character, they feel an overwhelming urge to explain, to justify, to defend every decision they have made. It feels natural. It feels logical. But power has never operated according to what feels natural. Power follows psychology, and psychology tells us something uncomfortable. The more desperately you defend yourself, the more people assume there is something to defend. Think carefully about the moments when someone accused you unfairly. What was your first instinct? Perhaps you began listing facts. Perhaps you explained your intentions. Perhaps you replayed every detail, hoping that if people simply understood your side, they would immediately change their opinion. But instead of ending the conflict, your explanations only created more questions. Every answer invited another accusation. Every defense opened another door for doubt. Before you realized it, you were trapped inside a conversation where someone else controlled the rules while you struggled to prove your innocence. This is one of the oldest psychological traps in human nature. The person who forces you to defend yourself is no longer discussing facts. They are controlling the frame. They have silently positioned themselves as the judge while placing you in the position of the accused. Once you accept that role, you have already surrendered the advantage. It no longer matters whether you are right or wrong. The very act of defending yourself confirms that they now hold the authority to evaluate you. Powerful people understand this invisible shift. They know that every unnecessary explanation gives away a piece of influence. Instead of rushing to clear their name, they slow down. Instead of speaking from emotion, they observe. They recognize that confidence does not beg for approval. Confidence does not panic because someone misunderstands it. Confidence understands that reputation is built over years of consistent behavior, not through one emotional argument. Look throughout history, business, politics, or leadership. The individuals who command the greatest respect rarely react to every criticism thrown at them. They understand that if they spent every day answering every accusation, they would have no time left to build anything meaningful. Their silence is not weakness. Their restraint is strategy. They know that people eventually judge character by patterns, not by isolated accusations. There is another reason defending yourself is dangerous. Emotion clouds judgment. The moment you feel attacked, your mind stops thinking strategically and starts thinking emotionally. You speak faster. You explain more than necessary. You reveal your fears, your insecurities, and your need to be understood. Ironically, these emotional reactions often become the very evidence your opponent uses against you. They see your frustration and mistake it for guilt. They see your urgency and mistake it for weakness. The person provoking you often expects exactly this reaction. They know that if they can make you emotional, they no longer need strong arguments. Your own emotions will do the work for them. You begin interrupting yourself. You contradict your own points. You become defensive in tone, and suddenly everyone watching the interaction is no longer focused on the original accusation. They are focused on your reaction. The conversation shifts from what happened to how you handled it. This is why emotional discipline is one of the highest forms of power. It allows you to separate your identity from the opinions of others. When someone challenges you, you no longer feel an urgent need to convince them. You realize something profound. Not everyone deserves an explanation. Some people are not searching for truth. They are searching for control. They ask questions not because they want answers, but because they want you trapped in endless justification. The strongest response is often the simplest one. Remain calm. Speak only when your words add value. Let your posture communicate certainty before your voice ever does. People expect panic from someone who feels cornered. When they encounter composure instead, the psychological balance begins to shift. Suddenly, they become uncertain. They expected resistance. They expected excuses. Instead, they are faced with someone who refuses to play the role of the accused. This does not mean you should never clarify misunderstandings. Wisdom knows the difference between necessary communication and emotional over-explaining. If a clarification serves a practical purpose, give it briefly and confidently. Then move on. Do not repeat yourself. Do not chase acceptance. Do not keep arguing with people who have already decided what they want to believe. Every additional explanation lowers your perceived confidence. Remember that your life is always speaking louder than your words. Your habits, your consistency, your integrity, and your achievements quietly build a reputation that no argument can destroy overnight. People may doubt your statements, but they struggle to ignore years of evidence. That is why the most effective defense is not another explanation. It is continued excellence. Every day you remain disciplined, focused, and composed becomes another piece of proof that requires no words. Eventually, something remarkable happens. The people who once expected you to defend yourself begin questioning their own assumptions. They notice that you are not shaken by criticism. They notice that you continue producing results while others waste energy attacking you. Without realizing it, the balance of power flips. The spotlight moves away from your character and toward the motives of those trying to provoke you. They lose influence because they cannot manipulate someone who refuses to surrender emotional control. Never forget this principle. The moment you stop trying to win every argument, you begin winning something far more valuable, your power. Once you understand that defending yourself gives away power, the next lesson becomes even more important. Learning how to use silence. Most people misunderstand silence. They think it is weakness, avoidance, or uncertainty. But history repeatedly shows that silence, when used with intention, is one of the most powerful psychological weapons a person can possess. It does something that endless words never can. It forces people to confront themselves. It creates uncertainty. It shifts the emotional burden away from you and places it squarely on the other person. Human beings are deeply uncomfortable with empty space in conversation. We are conditioned to explain, to respond immediately, to fill every pause before it becomes awkward. Someone asks a difficult question, and we rush to answer. Someone criticizes us, and we instantly begin defending ourselves. Someone accuses us unfairly, and we feel compelled to prove them wrong. But the person who remains silent interrupts this predictable pattern. Suddenly, the conversation is no longer following the script that everyone expects. Imagine someone trying to provoke you in front of others. They expect resistance. They expect frustration. They expect a debate. Instead, you simply look at them calmly. You pause. You allow the silence to exist without rushing to erase it. In that brief moment, something remarkable happens. The attention shifts. Instead of everyone analyzing your response, they begin analyzing the person who spoke. The silence forces your opponent to continue talking, and the more they talk, the greater the chance they reveal their true emotions. This is one of the hidden laws of human behavior. People often expose themselves when they are given enough room to speak. Anger becomes exaggeration. Confidence becomes arrogance. certainty becomes contradiction. Someone who begins with a simple criticism often ends by revealing envy, insecurity, resentment, or a desperate need for attention. They tell you far more than they intended because they mistake your silence for an invitation to keep speaking. Powerful individuals understand this instinctively. They know that every conversation is not won by speaking the most. It is often won by speaking the least. They observe before they react. They allow others to reveal their priorities, weaknesses, and intentions. While everyone else is busy trying to be heard, they are quietly gathering information. Information is power, and silence is often the fastest way to collect it. Consider negotiations. The inexperienced negotiator feels pressured to justify every demand. They keep talking because they fear losing the opportunity. The experienced negotiator makes their point and then waits. That silence creates psychological pressure. The other side begins wondering whether they asked for too much or offered too little. Unable to tolerate the discomfort, they often start negotiating against themselves. They fill the silence with unnecessary concessions, explanations, or compromises that were never requested. The same principle applies in everyday life. Think about disagreements between friends, coworkers, or family members. Most arguments continue not because the original problem was serious, but because both sides refuse to stop talking. Every sentence becomes another opportunity to misunderstand each other. Every explanation creates another point of attack. Eventually, the conversation has nothing to do with the original issue. It becomes a competition of egos, where each person desperately tries to have the final word. Silence breaks that cycle. It refuses to feed emotional chaos. It communicates something words cannot. I am not controlled by this moment. That message is incredibly powerful because emotional control is rare. Most people allow circumstances to dictate their reactions. They react instantly without reflection. When they encounter someone who remains composed under pressure, they feel uncertain because they cannot predict what comes next. This unpredictability creates influence. People are comfortable when they know exactly how to manipulate someone. If they know criticism makes you angry, they will use criticism. If they know insults make you defensive, they will use insults. If they know accusations make you explain yourself endlessly, they will keep accusing you. But when your response is calm silence, the strategy no longer works. Their usual weapons suddenly become ineffective. There is another hidden advantage to silence. It gives you time. Every second you remain calm allows your emotions to settle and your judgment to become clearer. Instead of speaking from impulse, you begin responding from intention. This small difference changes everything. Words spoken in anger often become permanent regrets. Words spoken after thoughtful silence tend to be measured, precise, and impossible to use against you. However, silence does not mean passivity. It is not about becoming invisible or refusing to communicate. Strategic silence is active, not passive. It is a deliberate decision to speak only when your words improve the situation. It is the discipline to recognize that not every challenge deserves your energy. Sometimes your greatest statement is refusing to participate in an argument designed only to drain your focus. Notice how respected leaders often answer difficult questions. They rarely rush. They pause. They think. Their silence is not empty. It communicates confidence. It tells everyone watching that they are not intimidated by pressure. They refuse to let urgency dictate their decisions. That brief pause earns more respect than 100 rushed explanations ever could. Many people fear silence because they assume others will interpret it as weakness. In reality, people usually project their own emotions onto silence. The insecure person assumes you are judging them. The impatient person assumes you are resisting them. The dishonest person assumes you know more than you are saying. Your silence becomes a mirror reflecting their own state of mind. That is why it is so psychologically powerful. It allows people to reveal themselves without your interference. As you practice this principle, you will notice an extraordinary transformation. Conversations become easier because you no longer feel responsible for filling every gap. Criticism becomes less threatening because you understand that immediate reactions are optional. Provocations lose their power because you refuse to reward them with emotional attention. Instead of chasing control, you quietly become the one who possesses it. Always remember that words can start battles, but silence often ends them before they truly begin. The person who masters silence does not merely control conversations, they control themselves. And that is where real power begins. By now, you begin to see the pattern. First, you stop defending yourself because unnecessary explanations hand your power to someone else. Then you learn to embrace silence because silence forces other people to reveal themselves. But neither of these principles can exist without something even deeper: emotional control. This is the foundation upon which all lasting power is built. Without it, silence becomes impossible, restraint becomes temporary, and every criticism has the ability to shake your confidence. Emotional control is not about suppressing feelings. It is about refusing to let your feelings become someone else's weapon. The world is full of people who understand one simple truth: if they can control your emotions, they can control your decisions. They may not realize they are doing it consciously, but the pattern repeats itself every day. Someone insults you because they want a reaction. Someone doubts your abilities because they want you to lose confidence. Someone disrespects you because they want to see whether you are emotionally stable or emotionally predictable. Every emotional reaction you give them becomes information they can use against you. Think about the last time someone made you angry. What happened next? Perhaps your voice became louder. Perhaps your words became less precise. Maybe you said something you later regretted. Perhaps your entire day was ruined because of one conversation that lasted only a few minutes. Notice what really happened. The other person did not simply make you angry. They redirected your attention. They stole your focus. Long after the conversation ended, they continued occupying space inside your mind. That is influence. That is control. And the greatest tragedy is that most people hand over this control without even realizing it. Powerful people recognize this danger immediately. They understand that every emotional outburst carries a hidden cost. Anger clouds judgment. Fear shortens vision. Pride refuses correction. Desperation destroys patience. In those emotional moments, people stop thinking strategically and start reacting instinctively. Decisions made in that state rarely produce good outcomes. The strongest person in the room is not the loudest. It is the one who can experience emotion without becoming imprisoned by it. This is why provocation is such a common tactic. Very few people can defeat you when you are calm, disciplined, and thinking clearly. But if someone can pull you into anger, they no longer have to compete with your intelligence. They only have to compete with your emotions. Once emotion takes control, you begin making mistakes for them. You interrupt people, you over-explain, you exaggerate, you lose perspective. In trying to defend your position, you slowly weaken it. Imagine two individuals facing the exact same criticism. The first immediately argues, raises their voice, and spends the next hour trying to prove they are right. The second simply listens, remains composed, and responds only after careful thought. Which one appears stronger? Which one seems more confident? Most observers instinctively trust the person who demonstrates emotional stability. Calmness creates credibility because it signals inner security. Desperation signals the opposite. This is why emotional discipline is so rare. It requires patience when every instinct tells you to react. It requires confidence when everyone expects insecurity. It requires maturity when the easier choice is revenge. These qualities cannot be borrowed in a single moment. They are developed through repeated practice. Every time you choose composure over impulse, you strengthen that discipline. Every time you refuse to let anger dictate your behavior, you become a little more difficult to manipulate. One of the greatest misconceptions about emotional control is that it means becoming cold or emotionless. That is not the goal. The goal is not to eliminate emotion, but to master it. Feel anger without allowing it to become reckless action. Feel disappointment without allowing it to become hopelessness. Feel criticism without allowing it to destroy your confidence. Emotions are natural. Servitude to emotions is optional. Consider how experienced leaders behave during moments of crisis. When everyone else is panicking, they remain steady. This does not mean they feel no fear. It means they refuse to let fear make decisions on their behalf. Their calmness spreads confidence to everyone around them. People naturally follow those who appear emotionally grounded because stability creates trust. Emotional chaos creates uncertainty. There is another reason emotional control is so valuable. It protects your long-term goals from short-term distractions. Every insult invites you into a battle that may have nothing to do with your future. Every criticism tempts you to spend hours defending your reputation instead of building it. Every unnecessary conflict steals energy that could have been invested in growth. Those who achieve extraordinary success understand the importance of protecting their attention. They refuse to spend valuable time fighting battles that produce no meaningful reward. Ask yourself a simple question whenever someone provokes you. Who benefits if I lose control? In most cases, the answer is obvious. The person provoking you gains satisfaction. They gain influence. They gain the ability to dictate the direction of the conversation. Meanwhile, you lose peace, focus, and clarity. Once you recognize this pattern, emotional discipline stops feeling like restraint and starts feeling like self-respect. Eventually, people begin to notice something different about you. They realize that insults no longer produce the same reactions. Criticism no longer distracts you for days. Difficult conversations no longer destroy your confidence. They discover that your emotions are no longer available for manipulation. Some will admire this transformation. Others will become frustrated because their old methods no longer work. Either way, the balance of power has changed. Remember, true strength is not measured by how fiercely you can respond when challenged. It is measured by how completely you remain yourself when others try to pull you away from your purpose. Every moment of emotional discipline is a quiet declaration that your mind belongs to you alone. The day you master your emotions is the day you become impossible for others to control. Once you have learned not to defend yourself unnecessarily, discovered the strength of silence, and mastered your emotional reactions, a new question naturally appears. If you are no longer spending your energy explaining yourself, where should that energy go? The answer is simple, yet it is one of the hardest principles for most people to accept. Your results must become your defense. Instead of investing your life in proving people wrong, invest it in becoming undeniably effective. Words fade. Arguments are forgotten. Excuses lose their value. But consistent results have a way of speaking long after your voice becomes silent. Most people live backwards. They spend countless hours trying to convince others that they are capable, intelligent, talented, or trustworthy. They explain their dreams before they have achieved them. They argue about their potential instead of developing it. They become exhausted trying to win approval from people who may never intend to give it. The tragedy is that none of this changes reality. No amount of explanation can replace visible achievement. Powerful people understand something different. They know that respect cannot be demanded. It must be earned through repeated action. Confidence cannot be borrowed from compliments. It must be built through discipline. Reputation cannot survive on promises. It survives on evidence. Every meaningful accomplishment quietly adds another layer to your credibility, while every unnecessary argument subtracts from the time you could have spent creating that accomplishment. Imagine two individuals facing the same criticism. One immediately begins listing reasons why the criticism is unfair. They defend every decision, explain every setback, and spend weeks trying to repair their image. The other listens, says very little, and quietly returns to work. Months later, one person still has explanations. The other has results. Which individual do you believe people eventually respect more? Human nature consistently favors evidence over excuses. This is why successful people often appear indifferent to criticism. It is not because criticism never affects them. It is because they have already chosen where to invest their attention. They know that every hour spent arguing is an hour stolen from progress. Every emotional debate delays the work that could have rendered the debate meaningless. They refuse to exchange long-term success for the temporary satisfaction of winning a short argument. There is a hidden confidence that develops when your identity becomes connected to your actions rather than other people's opinions. You no longer wake up wondering who believes in you because your focus shifts toward becoming the kind of person who produces value regardless of recognition. This mindset is incredibly liberating. It frees you from chasing validation because your standards become internal instead of external. Think about how nature operates. A tree never argues that it is growing. It simply continues growing until its strength becomes impossible to deny. It does not pause every season to convince observers that one day it will become tall. It invests its energy where it matters, in developing deeper roots and stronger branches. Human excellence follows the same principle. Quiet improvement creates louder evidence than constant explanation ever could. One reason many people struggle with this idea is because results require patience. Arguments produce immediate emotional satisfaction. Winning a debate feels rewarding in the moment. Building mastery takes months or years. That difference separates emotionally driven people from strategically driven people. The emotionally driven individual wants immediate recognition. The strategically driven individual is willing to delay recognition while they build something that cannot easily be questioned. Every meaningful goal demands this patience. If you are building a career, your skills become your defense. If you are building a business, the quality of your work becomes your defense. If you are building your character, your consistency becomes your defense. Eventually, people stop asking whether you are capable because Reality has already answered the question for them. There is another advantage to allowing your results to speak. Success changes conversations without requiring confrontation. People who once doubted you often begin rewriting their own opinions. They rarely admit they were wrong directly. Instead, they simply adjust their perception because the evidence has become impossible to ignore. Notice that you did not force this transformation through persuasion. You allowed reality to persuade them on your behalf. This principle also protects your emotional peace. When your primary focus becomes producing meaningful work, criticism loses much of its emotional power. Instead of obsessing over what someone said yesterday, you become occupied with what you are creating today. Progress naturally weakens the influence of negativity because your attention is invested in growth rather than conflict. Of course, this does not mean every result will be recognized immediately. Some of your hardest work may go unnoticed for a long time. Some of your greatest efforts may receive little appreciation in the beginning. But remember, the purpose of excellence is not immediate applause. The purpose is to become someone whose value compounds over time. Recognition often arrives later than effort, but lasting recognition almost always follows lasting discipline. History repeatedly reminds us that many extraordinary individuals were underestimated before they were respected. Their response was rarely endless explanation. They continued refining their craft, improving their abilities, and producing undeniable work. Eventually, their achievements became too significant to ignore. Their legacy was not built by defending their potential. It was built by fulfilling it. As you will always encounter people who misunderstand you, underestimate you, or question your ability. Resist the temptation to pause your journey every time someone expresses doubt. Every unnecessary stop delays your destination. Let them have their opinions while you continue building your future. Time has a remarkable way of revealing who invested their energy wisely. The strongest response to doubt is not another argument. It is another achievement. Every completed goal, every disciplined habit, every promise you keep to yourself quietly strengthens your reputation. Little by little, your life begins answering questions that your words never could. In the end, the world may forget every explanation you ever gave, but it will always remember the results you left behind. As you continue to understand the psychology of power, another truth begins to reveal itself. You no longer waste energy defending yourself. You no longer rush to fill every silence. You no longer allow your emotions to become another person's tool. You let your work speak louder than your words. But there is one final shift before true authority begins to emerge. Instead of trying to convince people that you are right, you quietly lead them to question whether their judgment was correct in the first place. This is one of the most subtle forms of influence because it does not rely on force, arguments, or manipulation. It relies on unwavering certainty. Most people believe persuasion comes from speaking more convincingly. They think that if they gather enough facts, raise their voice with enough confidence, or repeat their point often enough, they will eventually change someone's mind. Yet human psychology rarely works that way. People resist being told they are wrong because admitting error feels like admitting weakness. The harder you push against someone's belief, the harder they often cling to it. What begins as a disagreement quickly transforms into a battle of pride. Powerful individuals understand this dynamic. They know that direct confrontation often strengthens resistance rather than weakening it. Instead of trying to overpower another person's opinion, they remain calm, composed, and deeply confident in themselves. They do not chase agreement because they understand something profound. Certainty is contagious. When someone encounters a person who is completely at peace without needing approval, it creates an uncomfortable question in their own mind. What does this person know that I don't? Think about the people who have had the greatest influence over your life. Chances are they were not the loudest voices in the room. They were not constantly trying to prove their intelligence. They carried themselves with quiet confidence. They listened more than they argued. They answered criticism without desperation. Their calmness made people curious instead of defensive. That curiosity is the beginning of influence. Human beings naturally observe confidence before they evaluate arguments. This is not always rational, but it is deeply psychological. When someone appears emotionally secure under pressure, observers instinctively assume there must be a reason for that stability. On the other hand, someone who constantly rushes to defend every opinion unintentionally communicates insecurity, even when they are objectively correct. The need to prove yourself often weakens the very image you are trying to strengthen. Imagine someone publicly questions your competence. The average person immediately launches into a detailed explanation of qualifications, achievements, and reasons why the accusation is unfair. But another person simply smiles, answers briefly if necessary, and continues doing excellent work. Days later, people remember very little about the argument itself. What remains in their memory is the contrast. One individual appeared shaken. The other appeared completely unaffected. Without realizing it, observers begin asking themselves whether the criticism was justified at all. This is not about pretending to be confident. False confidence eventually collapses because it depends on appearance rather than substance. Genuine confidence grows from preparation, discipline, and repeated experience. When you know the effort you have invested, you no longer feel the urgent need to convince strangers of your value. Your self-respect is no longer rented from public opinion. One of the greatest mistakes people make is assuming that every misunderstanding requires immediate correction. It does not. Sometimes allowing people to hold temporary misconceptions gives reality enough time to reveal the truth. This requires patience because our ego desperately wants immediate justice. We want people to understand us now. We want our reputation restored today. Yet lasting respect is rarely created through immediate explanation. It is created through consistency over time. There is tremendous strength in allowing your character to unfold gradually. Every calm decision, every disciplined action, every promise you keep quietly challenges false assumptions more effectively than emotional arguments ever could. Eventually, people begin noticing the gap between the accusations they heard and the behavior they actually observe. That gap forces them into reflection. They begin questioning their own conclusions without you ever demanding it. This principle also teaches you the value of restraint. You do not have to expose every lie immediately. You do not have to answer every rumor. You do not have to correct every misunderstanding. Some situations resolve themselves simply because truth has a unique quality. It remains consistent. Falsehood, on the other hand, requires constant maintenance. Those who invent stories eventually contradict themselves. Those motivated by envy often reveal their motives through repeated negativity. Those seeking attention usually expose themselves by continually escalating conflict. Your role is not to help them reveal these weaknesses. Your role is to remain steady while they do it themselves. This requires enormous discipline because silence often feels uncomfortable. Remaining composed when misunderstood feels unfair. Continuing your work while others talk about you demands patience. But this patience becomes your advantage because most people eventually lose control before you do. There is another psychological effect at work here. People are naturally drawn toward mystery. When you stop explaining every decision and justifying every action, you become less predictable. Others begin paying closer attention because they cannot easily categorize you. This is not about playing games or acting distant. It is about recognizing that constant self-explanation removes curiosity, while calm confidence quietly creates it. As your certainty grows, you also become less dependent on praise. Compliments no longer inflate your ego, and criticism no longer destroys it. This emotional balance gives you tremendous freedom. You make decisions based on principles instead of popularity. You choose long-term respect over short-term approval. The opinions of others become information rather than commands. Ironically, this is often the moment when respect begins to increase. People trust individuals who trust themselves. They follow leaders who remain steady under pressure. They admire those who refuse to sacrifice their values simply to satisfy the crowd. Without demanding authority, you begin to possess it naturally. Remember that influence does not come from forcing people to admit you were right. Influence comes from living with such consistency, composure, and confidence that people gradually arrive at that conclusion on their own. When someone changes their mind because of their own reflection instead of your pressure, that change lasts much longer. The greatest victory is not proving your critics wrong. It is becoming so unwavering in your character that they quietly begin questioning themselves. Everything we have explored leads to this final principle, the one that ties every lesson together. You stop defending yourself because unnecessary explanations weaken your position. You learn the discipline of silence because silence reveals more than endless words ever could. You mastered your emotions because emotional control protects your freedom. You allowed your results to become your defense because achievement always speaks louder than argument. You learned to let people question their own judgment instead of forcing them to accept yours. But none of these principles can truly become part of your life until you discover the greatest source of power a human being can possess: detachment. Detachment is one of the most misunderstood ideas in life. Many people confuse it with coldness, arrogance, or a lack of compassion. It is none of those things. Detachment simply means that your inner peace is no longer controlled by the opinions, approval, or rejection of other people. It means your confidence is built on character rather than applause. It means your direction is guided by purpose instead of popularity. The detached person still cares deeply about people, but they no longer surrender their emotional stability to every passing judgment. Most people spend their lives trapped inside an invisible prison. They wake up wondering who approves of them. They measure their worth by compliments. They fear criticism as though it threatens their identity. Every conversation becomes a performance. Every decision becomes an attempt to avoid disapproval. Without realizing it, they become prisoners of public opinion. Their emotions rise and fall according to the reactions of strangers, coworkers, family members, or people they may never even meet again. This is exactly why manipulation is so common. Anyone who depends on approval can be controlled by the promise of acceptance or the threat of rejection. If someone knows you desperately need to be liked, they can shape your behavior. If they know you cannot tolerate criticism, they can silence you with fear. If they know your happiness depends on external validation, they possess influence over your decisions. The chains may be invisible, but they are real. The detached person quietly breaks these chains. They realize something that transforms the way they move through life. Not everyone has to understand you. Not everyone has to agree with you. Not everyone has to appreciate your efforts. Some people will misunderstand your intentions, regardless of how carefully you explain them. Others will dislike you simply because your growth reminds them of the progress they avoided. There are even those who criticize success because they have never experienced it themselves. Once you truly understand this, an extraordinary freedom begins to emerge. Imagine walking into a room where someone immediately judges you without knowing your story. Years ago, this might have ruined your confidence. You would have spent hours wondering how to change their opinion. But now something has changed. You recognize that another person's judgment often reflects their own experiences more than your reality. Instead of absorbing their opinion as truth, you simply acknowledge it and continue moving forward. This is not pride. This is emotional independence. There is immense strength in no longer feeling responsible for managing every person's perception of you. Think about how much energy most people waste trying to control what others think. They rehearse conversations that have already ended. They replay criticism over and over in their minds. They change their behavior to satisfy people who constantly move the standard anyway. It becomes an endless pursuit because approval has no finish line. The more you chase it, the further away it seems. Detachment redirects that energy back toward your own life. Instead of obsessing over opinions, you invest in your principles. Instead of chasing validation, you chase mastery. Instead of worrying about who believes in you today, you become the kind of person who quietly believes in yourself every day. This internal shift changes everything because self-respect becomes stronger than public recognition. One of the most remarkable effects of detachment is unpredictability. Manipulative people rely on predictable emotional patterns. They expect praise to motivate you. They expect criticism to discourage you. They expect rejection to make you desperate. But when you are detached, these familiar strategies lose their effectiveness. Praise becomes appreciated but unnecessary. Criticism becomes information rather than injury. Rejection becomes redirection rather than defeat. This is why truly powerful individuals often appear calm in situations that overwhelm everyone else. They are not calm because life is easier for them. They are calm because they refuse to let temporary circumstances dictate permanent emotions. They understand that today's criticism can become tomorrow's admiration. They know that public opinion changes with astonishing speed. Building your identity on something so unstable is like building a house on shifting sand. Detachment also protects your purpose. Every meaningful goal attracts distraction. Every worthwhile ambition attracts doubt. Every visible success attracts criticism. If you stop every time someone questions you, your journey will never reach its destination. The detached person understands that attention is their most valuable resource. They guard it carefully. They refuse to spend it on conflicts that offer no meaningful return. This does not mean becoming indifferent to learning or feedback. Wise people remain open to correction because growth requires humility. The difference is that they evaluate criticism instead of automatically believing it. Constructive advice is welcomed because it improves them. Empty negativity is ignored because it serves no purpose. Detachment gives you the clarity to distinguish between the two. As the years pass, you begin noticing something remarkable. The people who once tried to provoke you become frustrated. The insults that once disturbed your peace now barely interrupt your focus. The arguments that once consumed entire days now end in moments because you no longer feel obligated to participate. Others may still invite you into unnecessary battles, but you quietly decline because you understand that every battle has a cost, and not every victory is worth the price. This is the highest form of confidence. Not believing that you are better than others, but knowing that your value no longer depends on convincing anyone else of it. Your actions become intentional. Your emotions become disciplined. Your attention becomes protected. Your peace becomes non-negotiable. Remember this above all else. The greatest display of power is not defeating every opponent you encounter. It is becoming so grounded in your own purpose that other people's attempts to control you simply lose their meaning. When your peace no longer depends on external approval, no one can take your power without your permission.